Chapter 13. Strange Phenomenons. Because Han Li's foot was injured, Zhang Tai personally delivered food to Han Li's house and accompanied him for dinner. Han Li watched Zhang Tai stumble around in his house in a clumsy manner, moving around the chairs and setting the table. Only after a long while did he finally finish, and it was time to eat. Han Li was rather amused by this, but also quite touched by this gesture. After the table was set, both of them joked around as they ate, shoving food in their mouths while asking about their individual cultivation progress. The moment Han Li brought up the way of the armored elephant, Zhang Tai sighed dejectedly. Currently, Zhang Tai had only managed to cultivate the martial skill to its first layer, but was already half tortured to death by the immense pain. He had to soak himself in foul-smelling herbal baths every night as well as suffer beatings from Dr. Imo designed to toughen his body and strengthen his bones. This method of boorish cultivation had caused Zhang Tai many sleepless nights. Because his entire body was swollen from the beatings, the moment his skin touched his bed, he would grit his teeth in pain. To him, cultivating the way of the armored elephant was nothing but a nightmare. With regards to Han Li's cultivation of the nameless oracular chant, Zhang Tai could not help but feel envy in his heart. He felt that Han Li only needed to spend his time peacefully in meditation like a monk. Hearing Zhang Tai's emotions, Han Li had nothing to say in his defense. He was also aware that his cultivation was much easier when compared to Zhang Tai's arduous labor. Han Li could somewhat understand Zhang Tai's fear towards the way of the armored elephant. As he progressed through the 9 layers of the way of the armored elephant, he would have to bear unimaginable pain. Despite the difficulty, Zhang Tai persisted, refusing to give up. Han Li could not help but admire and respect Zhang Tai for his unyielding personality. If Han Li were in Zhang Tai's shoes, he would never have chosen to practice such a domineering skill. Even if the skill could turn him into a world-shaking expert overnight, he would still reject it. The two of them had almost finished dinner as they were talking excitedly about martial arts. Once the meal was over, Zhang Tai cleared the bowls and bid his farewell. Before leaving, he still reminded Han Li to take care of his injured foot and to go to sleep early. Standing at the door, Han Li watched as Zhang Tai left and quickly returned back to his house, closing all the windows except for a slight opening in the skylight to allow some air to flow through before taking out the mysterious bottle from his leather pouch. Han Li was only a 10-year-old child with a short attention span, and after studying the bottle for a short period of time, he quickly got bored. With his foot injury, Han Li also felt somewhat tired out by today's turn of events. Unknowingly, he fell asleep on his bed with his hand holding onto the bottle. Time passed by, and just when Han Li was sleeping soundly, he suddenly felt an icy cool feeling flowing from his hand. Han Li involuntarily shivered, and he forcefully opened his heavy eyelids, gazing at his hand in a daze. Oh! He immediately sat up with his mouth open from shock, to such an extent that saliva dripped down from his gaping mouth. He no longer felt sleepy. Instead, his attention was fixed on the strange sight in front of him. Rays of white light could be seen beaming through the gap from the skylight. The beams concentrated around the bottle Han Li held in his hand, forming many rice-sized white dots of light on its surface and enveloping the bottle in a layer of rays of white light. The rays of light looked extremely gentle, not menacing at all, and that icy cool feeling originated precisely from the rays of light. Han Li swallowed a big gulp of saliva and finally turned his eyes away from the bottle. As if it burned his hand, he quickly threw the bottle to one side before scrambling to the other side of the room. After a moment of vigilance, he realized that nothing was wrong and slowly inched towards the mysterious bottle. The mysterious bottle enveloped by the white light, and other than looking beautiful, it seemed to possess an aura that was not of this world. Han Li hesitated for a while before using his finger to poke the bottle a few times. Seeing there was no reaction, he cautiously picked up the bottle again. Putting the bottle on the table, he laid on the nearby bed and closely examined this never-before-seen phenomenon. Han Li focused his full attention on the mysterious bottle for about an hour and a half without even blinking before he finally realized some of the secrets that the mysterious bottle was hiding. The mysterious bottle was incessantly absorbing the rice-sized beads of white light surrounding it. No, not simply absorbing. It was as if the beads of white light had a will of their own and were fighting with each other in order to be the first to enter the bottle. Hanli viewed this extremely bizarre event and used his fingertip to touch a bead of white light. It felt icy cold. Other than this, there was nothing special about it. Hanli inclined his head and looked upward. The rays of white light were still beaming through the gap in the skylight as if they had no intention of stopping. Hanli surveyed the interior of his room to make sure the doors and windows were all closed before inclining his head to look at the skylight once more. Suddenly, a thought struck him, and he lightly pushed open the door, popping his head out to peek at his surroundings. Luckily, it was the middle of the night. Other than insects, there was no one else around. Hanli returned back to his room, grabbing the bottle and putting it back inside the pouch before hurrying outside again, running to a remote location before stopping. Surveying all 4 directions and ensuring there was no one nearby, Hanli cautiously removed the bottle from his pouch and placed it gently on the ground. While the mysterious bottle had been sealed in his pouch, the white rays of light had disappeared. However, Hanli wasn't worried by this. As he expected, after waiting a while, rays of white light began congregating around the bottle from all 4 directions. This time round, the rays were much denser than the rays produced in his house. They tightly enveloped the mysterious bottle in a shroud of white light, forming a ball of light the size of a wash basin. Chapter 14. Mysterious Liquid. Ah! Hanli cried out with excitement and pumped his fist into the air. By doing so, he revealed that he was indeed still a child. His assumptions seemed to be correct. When the bottle was in the dark room, the amount of light attracted to it was quite small. But when in a wide and open area, the amount of light attracted to it was far greater in quantity. But what caused the light to gather? What use did it serve? Although he didn't know the answer, Hanli felt he was close to solving the riddle behind the mysterious bottle. Hanli knew that he would soon unravel the secret of the mysterious bottle, which made him tremendously excited. At dawn, the light that had gathered around the bottle slowly faded away. After making sure that there was no one nearby observing his actions, Hanli returned his attention to the bottle's status. He bent down to pick the bottle up and inspected it. However, there seemed to be no difference since it was still impossible to open. Hanli felt disappointed, but seeing how morning was arriving, he unwillingly put the bottle away and prepared to leave. After all, he still wanted to return to the stone chamber to practice his cultivation. For the next following nights at fixed intervals, the bottle would undergo the same experience. Countless specks of light would fly towards the bottle like moths to a flame. No matter how big or small the specks of light were, they were greedily devoured by the bottle. Initially, Hanli thought that the bottle would continue to undergo the same process for an unknown amount of time. But on the 8th day, something unexpected happened. When Hanli went back to the remote place in the mountains and placed the bottle in its regular spot, the absorbance of the specks of light continued only for half an hour when it suddenly stopped. The dark green designs on the bottle then began to emit a green radiance as golden words manifested on the surface of the bottle. The strange words on the bottle were imposing and firm, but the written strokes were unusual. The words seemed to belong to an ancient era, the characters flickering incessantly. But this weird occurrence had ended as suddenly as it began. Aside from the golden words that were now imprinted onto the bottle, everything else remained the same. After seeing so many strange things happening with the bottle in the past few days, Hanli was no longer as surprised as he had been in the past. Even the appearance of the golden words did not surprise him very much. Casually grasping the bottle in his hand, he tried to open the bottle on a whim, and much to his extreme surprise, the lid popped off with barely any effort. No way! Hanli stared at the bottle in shock. With next to no effort or thought, Hanli's problem regarding how to open the bottle had been suddenly resolved. How could it be so easy to open? Repeatedly looking down at the bottle to confirm that what he was looking at was not fake, he tried to calm his agitated heart before looking straight into the bottle. Inside the bottle was a jade green drop of liquid no bigger than a soybean. As it flowed around inside the bottle, the entire inside of the bottle reflected a green luster. What was this drop of liquid? Hanli was disappointed. He had put in so much effort only to be rewarded with some seemingly mundane liquid. Disappointed, Hanli put the bottle back into his pouch before turning around and dejectedly returning to his room. His previous excitement had been thrown to the farthest corners of the earth in a sudden roller coaster of emotions. Although he had finally opened the bottle, he was absolutely disappointed with the result. Still, Hanli was prepared to take his time to discover what secrets that drop of jade green liquid held. Perhaps in the future, it would be able to give him an unexpected surprise. Right now, what he wanted to do most was to go back and sleep. For the past few days, he had not been able to sleep properly, which even cut into his daytime cultivation, making his progress so inefficient to the point where even Dr. Imo had inquired him about it. Ever since Hanli had become Dr. Mo's disciple after breaking through the first layer of the chant, he felt that there was no longer a need to practice the chant. Disappointed by the chant's effects on his body, or lack thereof, he was unwilling to continue relying on it to cultivate. For that, Dr. Imo fiercely reprimanded him. However, whenever it came time to cultivate, he was still always drowsy and unmotivated, completely devoid of vigor. This made Dr. Imo furious, and he couldn't help but wonder if he had accepted the wrong disciple. Thinking about his situation, Hanli couldn't help but feel wronged. However, he just wasn't in the mood for cultivation. But what Hanli couldn't imagine was that after waking up on the second day, he would once again motivated and throw his entire body into cultivating like a madman. The reason he was cultivating in such a manner was simply because of a single, simple statement Dr. Imo had made. For every single layer you improve with this chant, I will increase the amount of silver issued to you by another twofold. Dr. Imo had seen the thirst Hanli had for money and figured out a way for Hanli to be enticed. This way, Hanli would have enough motivation to cultivate. For the next few days, Hanli dedicated himself to cultivation, hoping to break through to the second layer. Every day from morning to noon and from noon to night, he would enter the stone cultivation chamber and cultivate. Any thoughts about how repetitious, mundane, or boring this lifestyle was immediately got thrown out of Hanli's head. For the sake of Hanli's cultivation, Dr. Imo had even temporarily sealed off the Godhand Valley. Even when he treated patients, he would treat them outside the valley for fear of disrupting Hanli. Hanli was now so focused on breaking through that he even forgot about analyzing the effects of the bottle's jade green liquid. Autumn went by as winter came, then spring rolled in before summer arrived. In a flash, 4 years had gone by, and Hanli was now 14 years old. He grew up to be a taciturn, determined, and tan-skinned rustic youngster. Based on his external appearance alone, he looked no different than any other common peasant farmer. His looks did not warrant any attention. He was not extraordinarily handsome, and neither did he have a noble's elegance. This was the result of living in the stone cultivation chamber every day. He would travel back, and from there to his home. Occasionally, he would go to Dr. Mo's residence to learn about medicine and to read from Dr. Mo's collection of books. The entire valley was his world to live in, and thanks to his hard work, he had finally broken through to the third layer. Chapter 15. 4 years later. Dr. Imo was extremely satisfied with the amount of effort Hanli had dedicated to his cultivation. However, he still felt that Hanli's rate of progress at breaking through to the next layer in the oracular chant was too slow. These past few years, the illness Dr. Imo was suffering from had been getting more serious. He would cough countless times a day, with the bouts of coughing getting more and more frequent while lasting longer and longer. As the condition of his body worsened, Dr. Imo started to pay more attention to Hanli's cultivation. From his relentless urging, one could see the anxiety in his heart. For some reason, Dr. Imo attached an enormous amount of importance to Hanli. Not only did he increase payment in terms of silver, Dr. Mo's gaze was even filled with a tender and caring emotion as if he were examining a rare treasure. Despite this, Hanli, who had reached the third layer in the oracular chant, noticed an underlying truth with his extremely acute senses. Hanli inadvertently discovered that behind Dr. Mo's warm and friendly gaze was a trace of coldness and extreme greed, which made Hanli feel extremely uncomfortable. That gaze that Dr. Imo threw at him actually caused Hanli to be frightened from the tips of his hair all the way to the marrow in his bones. He felt that Dr. Imo saw him more as an object instead of as a living being. This made Hanli felt puzzled. What could he possibly have that Dr. Imo desired? Of course, there's nothing I have that he would be interested in, Hanli assured himself after thinking deeply. There were even times when Hanli thought that he was overly tired from cultivating the nameless chant, and he would shake his head in shame. He could not help but blame himself. After all, berating Dr. Mo behind his back was an ungrateful act. However, he did know the exact reason why. In the deepest recesses of his heart, he still held a feeling of caution whenever he interacted with Dr. Mo. As time passed, this feeling of caution got stronger and stronger. Currently, Hanli was facing a huge problem. He had already reached the bottleneck of the third layer, but Dr. Mo's stock of precious herbs had already run dry. Obviously, Hanli was not a genius by any means. If it wasn't for the assistance of the medicinal herbs, his cultivation progress would have long since stagnated. Every time he met Dr. Mo, Hanli could not help but feel a sense of shame. Dr. Mo had practically spent all of his fortunes to painstakingly aid Hanli in his cultivation, creating favorable conditions for Hanli, and yet, Hanli was unable to satisfy his request. This made Hanli extremely unwilling to meet Dr. Mo's gaze whenever there was an inquiry by Dr. Mo regarding his state of progress. Strangely enough, for who knows what reason, the highly skilled Dr. Mo was unable to know Hanli's progress without being told by Hanli. Thus, he was kept in the dark regarding the problem of Hanli's bottleneck. However, not long ago, the guilt in Hanli's heart caused him to seek out Dr. Mo and confess about the bottleneck he faced in his cultivation. After Dr. Mo heard that in the past year, there had not been the slightest progress in Hanli's cultivation, his normally expressionless face became extremely unsightly. To Hanli's surprise, Dr. Mo did not rebuke him. Instead, he told Hanli that he would be gone from the valley for a period of time to gather the necessary herbs and reminded Hanli to continue devoting his efforts into cultivating the oracular chant. 2 days later, Dr. Mo brought along a case filled with tools needed to extract herbs and left the Seven Mysteries sect. After he left, Hanli was all alone in the God-Hand Valley. As for his good friend, Zhang Tai, he had already cultivated to the third layer of the Way of the Armored Elephant 2 years ago, and had disappeared without a trace. Zhang Tai only left a letter of farewell, stating that he wanted to explore Jianghu. This incident caused a great disturbance in the sect. After that, there were rumors that Zhang Tai's family was spared from punishment after Dr. Mo pleaded on their behalf. Hanli felt that the entire matter was extremely bizarre, and after thinking about it, he was sure that there was more that met the eye regarding this matter. Regardless, Hanli held no position of importance in the sect. Thus his words were ignored, and this matter had long since been swept under the rug. After contemplating, Hanli thought, could it be that Zhang Tai was so afraid of the backlash caused by the fourth layer of his martial skill that he ran away? Putting his thoughts of Zhang Tai aside, Hanli cultivated for a few days inside the valley, but was still unable to make the slightest bit of progress. Since he was a hot-blooded male, he decided to explore the celestial Rainbow Mountains instead of staying cooped up in the God-Hand Valley. As he walked along the mountain paths, the paths that he knew so well actually held a tinge of unfamiliarity. He could not help but feel slight traces of sadness in his heart. These past few years, because of his cultivation, it was as if Hanli was staying in a prison, unable to take a single step outside the valley. The disciples of the Seven Mysteries sect should have already long forgotten his existence. On the roads, Hanli met a few disciples that were under patrol duty. From their perspective, this stranger wearing the robes of an inner disciple filled them with suspicion. It was only after much explanation that Hanli managed to convince them that he was indeed a disciple of the Seven Mysteries sect. To avoid any more situations like that, Hanli decided to traverse along the small trails that were separated from the main road. As expected, he met no other disciples, and this enabled him to travel faster with no interruptions. Looking at the beautiful scenery and listening to the birds chirping, Hanli felt that, for that moment, it was as if everything that was troubling him had melted away. Suddenly, the sound of weapons clashing rang out as the air erupted with a cacophony of cursing voices emitted from the ravine of a nearby mountain. What? There are so many people gathered in such a remote location? Great curiosity arose in Hanli's heart, and no longer fearing the questions of other disciples, He followed the noises and sought out the source of the sound. What a big crowd!
Han listarade muteli in chock.
The ravine, completely hidden by the forest, was a small area. Despite this, there was a total of 100 people crowding together in the ravine. There were also people standing on the branches of giant trees. Two groups of people were staring at each other, and a thick sense of enmity emanated from both groups. The group of people standing on the left side consisted of a total of 12 people, while the group on the right side consisted of 7 people. Hanli discovered that these two groups were of similar age as him. All of them were about 15 to 20 years old. A slight smile hung on his lips as he thought, what a coincidence. From this group of people, Hanli could pinpoint a few familiar faces.
Fang Yubao, Zhang Dalu, Mayun, San Lisong, Ai.
Fatty Wong is even more obese than the last time I saw him. This person is Metalhead Lu.
She.
He was actually so tan back then. To think that his skin is so fair and white now. Has he become someone that lives on the earnings of a woman, so he can sit and be lazy the whole day? Hanli sniggered as he climbed the huge tree as he began to lose himself in his memories. Chapter 16. Little Abacus. Down below, two bare-handed youths were locked in close-quarters combat. One was fat but held a steady composure and possessed Herculean strength. This was Hanli's good friend, Fatty Wong. Fatty Wong's plump body boasted fists of mighty strength and a loud yell to accompany every punch. With each punch, a gust of wind followed. The other fighter was like a rat. He did not bother to block any of the punches thrown at him and instead chose to evade them. It appeared that he wanted to fight a war of attrition, exhausting Fatty Wong before finishing him off. Seeing how his good friend was in the battle, Hanli naturally hoped Fatty Wong would win. After a while, Fatty Wong still showed no signs of slowing down. Although Hanli did not practice martial arts, his intuition told him that Fatty Wong would not lose. He looked around in hopes of finding someone who could explain what was happening here. Hanli saw a person sitting not too far away on a rock. It was a youth constantly gesturing while crying out, hit his head, kick his waist, ya, almost. That's right, kick his butt. Use all of your strength. This youth was beaming radiantly as he cheered. It almost felt as if he was standing right next to Fatty Wong, giving words of encouragement as his personal coach. Hanli concluded that this person was pretty interesting, so he slowly climbed down the tree to get to where he was. Senior, do you know the two who are fighting and why they're fighting?
Anlia Scapulitelli.
What do you mean, do I know? Is there anything that I, little Abacus, don't know? Of course I know everything about the fight. Who are you? How come I've never seen you before? Did you just join the sect? No, that's not right. There's still over half a year until the next disciple examination. So who are you then? This person was very enthusiastic at first, but when he realized he had never seen Hanli before, his expression became serious and even a little suspicious. I am Hanli, a friend of Fatty Wong, who is fighting there, Hanli replied simply. Fatty Wong's friend? I know all of his friends, and you're not one of them. The person became more and more wary. Oh, I've been in closed-door training for the past few years. Not knowing who I am is not surprising, Hanli half-lied. Is that right? You also joined the sect as a disciple 4 years ago? To think that there would be something that the omniscient me didn't know. He looked at Hanli's clothes, appearing to believe in Hanli's words. The person known as Little Abacus and Hanli talked about a few unrelated subjects until he finally answered Hanli's question. Junior disciple, what you don't know is that this is all because of a woman. That is, the self-proclaimed smarty pants said as he began to explain in great detail. Indeed, he seemed to know most of the sect matters that were floating around. It seemed that there were 2 people involved. One was called Wang Yang, who was Fatty Wong's cousin, and the other was Zhang Changgue. The 2 were both disciples of the 7 Mysteries sect, but one was an outer sect disciple while the other was an inner sect disciple. While these 2 had grown up in the same town, neither of them had ever spoken with each other. This all happened because of a girl. The girl was betrothed to Wang Yang from an early age, but one day, while traveling back home, the head of the Zhang family had caught a glimpse of her and decided to give her to Zhang Changgue. Using his money and influence, he had taken both her and her family, ignoring Wang Yang's engagement. This grievous news had dealt a heavy blow to Wang Yang as he had long since been infatuated with her. Knowing that there was no way he'd be able to oppose the Zhang family, he jumped to his death in the river. Even though it was a tragedy, his death should have ended the matter. But who could have guessed his close cousin Fatty Wang, after learning what had happened, would refuse to let his cousin go unavenged. After confronting Zhang Changguo, the two vowed to duel, agreeing that the loser would be the winner's slave. Zhang Changguo may have been arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. He understood that, in martial arts, he was inferior to Fatty Wang. He requested that he be allowed to bring friends who could help out and join in to fight multiple rounds. Fatty Wang readily agreed. Afterward, Zhang Changguo used his money to look for disciples within the outer sect to help him. Although Fatty Wang was poor and had no money, he was a good friend to many disciples within the sect, and many of them had decided to come to his aid. As a result, many had come to show their support, which led to a great amount of hostility on the verge of exploding. Hearing this, Hanli had realized that this conflict had grown too serious to settle without any bloodshed. Unexpectedly, a small spar had blown up into such an enormous affair. You are here to help Fatty Wang, right? If they don't abide by the rules, then we will move in and beat them until they wet themselves in fear. Let them know that we peasants are not easy to bully. The youth spoke without stopping for a single breath. Hanli gave a bitter smile as he realized that he should not get involved. After all, picking a side would only serve to make enemies, and because of his few years of cultivation, his impulsiveness had long since been whittled away. Plus, Hanli had never learned any martial arts and wouldn't be able to beat even the weakest disciple. After watching the competition, it would be better for him to return back to the valley. Good. Suddenly, the youth cried out loud. Upon hearing the youth, Hanli turned his head back to look at the fight. As it turns out, Fatty Wang's enemy slipped up and was struck in the forehead by a large fist, smacking him to the ground already unconscious. Immediately, a part of the crowd cheered in support while the others had nasty looks on their faces. Fatty Wang's face had a look of pride on it as he pumped his fist upward. Slapping his butt, he walked swaggeringly back towards his side, smug about his victory. From Zhang Changguo's side came two people who took the fainted disciple away. Then, each side produced one individual. One was carrying a saber while the other carried a sword. Each of them had fiery looks on their faces, but neither said a word. Holding their weapons up, they began to clash, the sound of ringing metal quickly filling the air.